3, 4.
Hi everyone, this is Jewish Talk coming to you from Nassau Community College on 90.3 WHPC. Also streaming live on the iHeart and the iTunes app. This program is later archived on thespeaker.com. So hi there. My name is Rabbi Perl. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This all depends, of course, when you are joining us. But whatever time it is, you've heard this. This is a routine. Every week, the same introduction. Miss Probably you're bored stiff. I'm not, because I'm so excited to be able to be with you. Despite this very difficult time, this great station has remained open day and night and allowing us all, both those in the station, those outside of the station, to be able to provide amazing, amazing quality programming in all different genres. So here we are, dear friends. Let's look at our thoughts for today. Yesterday, in synagogues around the world, we read of a golden rule. A golden rule that we need to remind ourselves of during these rather strange times. The golden rule is as follows. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Wow. I know that's not politically correct. Love thy neighbor as thyself. And numerous other included many other social mitzvahs. And I find it necessary to focus on another of our special insights, one which in our own day seems to have been forgotten, much to our detriment, I sadly say. You see, under the general commandment, be holy, the Torah instructs us not to engage in sorcery, superstitions, and other related activities which were practiced by the heathen nations of old. Now, elsewhere in Deuteronomy, the Torah prescribes other practices such as consulting the dead, and we are told to be sincere and wholehearted with God. That means to follow the Torah way of life, and when in doubt, we should consult a prophet or a recognized spiritual leader, the Torah authorities of the day. So sorcery, dabbling in the occult, really, and crossing over into these are very serious infractions that we should really strenuously avoid. A Jewish grandmother once took her grandson to a seance. After making her magic, the crystal ball lady claimed she had made contact with the woman's deceased husband, Chaim. And indeed, they heard a male voice saying how everything was well with him on the other side, and he answered all their questions. Then little Harry, the grandson, piped up and said, "Zadie, may I ask you one more question, please? When did you learn to speak English so well?" Whether you believe that those who practice spiritualism are indeed making contact or not, makes little difference from the Jewish perspective. Imagery or real, the Torah forbids it. Even if it is real, that doesn't mean it's right. Not everything that can be done ought to be done. Most people seem to be confused by this. They become convinced that if it really is able to happen, then that kind of legitimizes it. Often it is those who have been bereaved, especially under tragic circumstances, who are anxiously seeking answers and grasping for comfort through these unholy sources. Unholy, you ask? Yes, you see, there is a fundamental difference between, and this is my point, between spiritual and holy. Not everything spiritual is necessary holy, and not everything holy needs to be spiritual. Bilam, who was this famous heathen prophet, he was able to communicate with God, but he was very unholy. He tried to put a curse on the Jewish people, which would allow their enemies to destroy them completely. They had done him no harm. He was greedy, lustful, anti-Semitic, far from a holy person, but he was very, very spiritual. Clearly, not everything spiritual is holy. Let's take another example. Money is very, very physical. But if you use it for holy purposes, like charity, it becomes holy. Clearly, not everything holy needs to be spiritual. It may be possible to cross over, but in the process, we may be getting ourselves involved with unholy forces. There are forces of darkness out there too. And if we are not dealing with the proper prophets of old or bona fide holy mystics, we may, God forbid, get burnt. And who knows if our connections are not seen as interference. We may very well be guilty of disturbing the dead, in which case we might actually be doing more harm than good. I just want to tell you a story about Rabbi Shabsi Alpern, who is the Chabad representative in Brazil. Many such practices occur in his community. All these are cults and speaking to the dead. He once asked the Lubavitch Rebbe what to tell people about this. And the Rebbe answered to them that every one of us has a direct connection to God, and we do not need a medium to connect. In fact, why take a circuitous route if you can go direct? If you want to help the deceased, guess what? Judaism has many worthwhile suggestions. Kaddish, tzedakah, any mitzvah in memory are all good deeds which have positive effects on the soul. Torah study, particularly Mishnah, is highly recommended. By all means, we should all deepen our spirituality, study the esoteric side of the Torah with reliable, trustworthy teachers to gain an appreciation into Jewish mysticism. But we're told to be wholesome with God, not to dabble in forbidden fields. Be holy in the way our Holy Torah tells us to be. Again, on this famous golden rule that we find in the readings of this weekend, again, I mentioned them at the beginning of our program. Love thy fellow as thyself is not only famous, but it also sounds like an injunction that is virtually impossible to fulfill. Can one ever hope to reach such an exalted level of saintliness to love anyone else as much as we love ourselves? Is the Torah not being naive or utterly unrealistic to expect us, each you and me, to love our neighbor like ourselves? Come on. Indeed, the classical commentaries grapple with this issue. Some suggest that we are being taught to act as if we love our fellow. Or if we behave in such a way, the actual emotion may well follow in time. But I want to share with you the Hasidic classic insight written in the Tanya, chapter 32, that teaches that if one is able to put physical considerations aside and focus on the spiritual, it may actually be within the realm of a person possible to achieve true love of another. Indeed, our petty likes and dislikes are all based on physical preferences. He looks good, she doesn't this, they live over here, they make this job. We can find 40,000 different reasons to dislike somebody else. We either approve or disapprove of the way others look, the way they talk, the way they dress, the way they behave. But these are all material concerns. If we could only remember that these are just superficial, external, and of little consequence, we wouldn't take them at all very seriously. What matters is the spiritual. The real person is not the body, but the soul. The essence of every individual is not his nose, but his neshama, his soul. So what if he's ugly and his mother dresses him funny? This person is a soul, a pure, untainted soul. Who knows if the other person's soul is not greater, holier, and more pristine than mine? No one can say his soul is better than the next person's. So by focusing on the inner identity of a person, we can avoid getting irritated by their outer idiosyncrasy. We might think someone weird, but would we ever accuse him or her of having a weird soul? So if we can rise above the superficial and concentrate on the spirit rather than the body, on the essence rather than the external, we do have a chance of observing this fundamental mitzvah in the literal sense of love your fellow like yourself. How easy it is to fall into the trap of labeling people, of characterizing them and writing them off. Him? I'm a shiganer. Her? Rotten to the core. That family? They're impossible. You know what I'm talking about. Many years ago, I was trying to help a man organize a get, which is the Jewish religious divorce. Trying to organize it for his estranged and already civilly divorced wife. The problem was she refused to cooperate. Now, usually the problem is the reverse. Usually the men are the rotten ones. So I engaged an attorney, a friend of mine, to help with the case. The next day, he called me to say it was all sorted out. I couldn't believe my ears. How did you do it? He answered with such genuine directness that I was completely taken aback. I called her up and said, I believe you are not an ogre. Immediately, I received a favorable response and the deal was done. See, nobody's really an ogre. Even Shrek was a nice ogre. If we can learn to give people the benefit of the doubt, we might be surprised at how friendly and cooperative they really can be. Individuals with the most notorious reputations aren't half as good as they are made out to be when we get to know them. Human monsters are rare indeed. The spark of humanity needs but to be aroused, and the godly soul is stirred and revealed. So let's try and to be more generous, a little more patient and forgiving. We may well be surprised at how lovable people can be. Let me turn a little bit on our subject and talk about eternally grateful. Respecting our parents seems to become more difficult as we get older. When we were small, we didn't really have much choice. We were totally dependent on them. Then we became adolescents. Not easy then to fulfill the mitzvah, the fifth commandment, honor thy father and thy mother. It's much easier said than done for a teenager for whom autonomy is the call of the hour. But it seems to me that it gets even more complicated as we ourselves become mature adults. What happens when a parent is aging ungracefully? What if they're becoming irritable, cantankerous, and just plain difficult? Becoming old and forgetful isn't pretty. And it can make a child's responsibility quite a challenge. Perhaps this is why the Torah tells us that it says, Ish imoi va'aviv tira'u, which translates, a man shall revere his mother and father. Ish means a man, or as an adult. In other words, the Torah is telling us clearly, even when you are an adult, you still have the moral obligation to show respect and reverence for your parents. It doesn't matter that you are the world's busiest executive or that your social calendar is filled with important events. You're still a child. That person helped bring you into this world, fed you, clothed you, changed your dirty diapers, and educated you. Yours is a lifetime debt of gratitude. There's a Rabbi Yirmiyahu of blessed memory, told an interesting story when he came from South Africa, I believe, and he came to visit the United States, looked up some old friends who were living in an old age home. He asked them whether their children visited them regularly. One old man's answer was the quote from the Psalms, Baruch Hashem Yom Yom. That's the words. Blessed is God day after day. The Rabbi Eloi was most impressed. Every single day your children come to visit you? That's fantastic. No, Rabbi, you don't understand, explained the old man. Yom Yom. Baruch Hashem Yom Yom, 2 days. Thank God for 2 days of the year. Mother's Day and Father's Day. You know what I'm talking about. There is no question that there are times when the best things for older people is caring, well-run institution. At least that we can do is to visit regularly. And the longer people can be independent, the better, but without trying to lay guilt trips on anyone. Let me share an example that was experienced growing up. It's a story of a family, the Gordon family, where the grandmother passed away, and the grandfather came to live with the children and grandchildren. And this particular grandchild had the privilege of being his roommate on and off for about 12 years. At times I would help him with his accounting. This young man explains, because the man ran a Gemilas Chesed fund, a charity fund that he operated from the house. This was a community free loan fund, and that distributed over $1 million in interest-free loans annually. Now, he also remembered, this young man, of how he helped him cut his toenails, which was difficult for him to reach. But far more than how he helped him, the older man, his grandfather, helped him. He was a special role model to the young man, to the grandchild. Though he wore a rabbinical hat and a long beard, he never preached. His presence and his personality were enough of a message to the young man as a confused adolescent searching for his way in life. Without his quiet inspiration, the young man would never probably have become a rabbi. He never even knew what a profound influence he had on the person's life. So while it may be difficult and true that older people can be, sometimes really out there, this young man shared with me. He remembers Zadie being impatient and irritable at times, too. But the rewards of giving that respect far outweighed the sacrifices, the rewards he got. So, there's one more thing. At the end of the day, the way we treat our parents is likely to be the way our children will treat us. Yeah, that's the reality. Now, have you ever felt like losing your temper, but at the last moment you managed to restrain yourself? Battles of this kind are often associated with traffic wardens and similar representatives of the official people. Sometimes they are found in encounters on the domestic front as well. So along comes the Torah this week and tells us the idea of that we should be holy. Now, what exactly does it mean to be a holy person? Along comes Rashi and explains that the term holy means self-restraint. There are many temptations in life. To be holy means to have the ability to control one's immediate impulses. Another commentator, Nachmanides, makes the point that this self-restraint may sometimes take a person to a point beyond the simple letter of the law. For example, Jewish law permits a person to eat kosher food. But should one be an out-and-out glutton? According to this view, even if the food is as kosher as could be, restraint is power. It shows that one is truly free as an individual, rather than just being a slave to one's appetite. We do remember the story of Jacob and Esau and the plate of lentils. One way of understanding that story is that Esau was ready to sell his birthright, the most precious thing in his life, for a plate of food. One response might be, how pathetic. How pathetic. Others might feel sympathy with someone who is sometimes a slave to his senses. They might say that after all, this is our human situation. Nonetheless, many people would expect a person to aspire to be a master over his or her own being, to be in control. A human being, yes. An animal, no. So much of the Torah portion is devoted to giving guidelines about this kind of self-mastery, a number of different areas of life. Central is the theme of personal relationships. So the key note to these is the famous teaching, love your neighbor as yourself. And the famous Rabbi Akiva said that this is the great principle of the entire Torah. It relates to all other aspects of Jewish thought. The Torah portion also instructs us not to take revenge, nor even to bear a grudge. This certainly needs self-control in our actions, in our words, and even our thoughts. Imagine such a person. Does he or she actually exist? We can imagine a very simple, naive, or even inspired kind of person who never sees bad in anyone. Or we can imagine a person of power who has acquired genuine inner self-mastery. What is power? For a long time, people thought that it means mastery over others. But today we learn, do you know what power is? Is mastery over oneself. Daily life presents us with many instances of personal battles described in the Torah, in relationships with our parents, as we discussed, in business dealings, in questions about giving charity, in borders between men and women, and also regarding our behavior when we're genuinely in power over others as judges. Therefore, the portion tells us to be fair in judgment to both the rich and the poor. The portion represents the challenge of the power of restraint, building a world of goodness for the future, when the whole world will be filled with holiness. So, another highlight of the Torah portion, giving us some principles and insights to life, is the description of the high priest's service on Yom Kippur. Once a year, the high priest, we're going to the holies of holies in biblical times, and it's fascinating the kind of resume this individual must be. For example, this individual high priest on that day, on Yom Kippur, must be married. He also be someone who has a family or is planning to have a family. He has to have a family. He can't be single, or someone who even, for physical reasons can't have children. He has to be married. And there are lots of fascinating insights. But one of the important roles of this high priest on Yom Kippur, now typically if you're in the synagogue on Yom Kippur in the afternoon service is really, the Musaf service is really an insight to exactly what the high priest would do in biblical times. The way he dressed, what he did, when he went to the mikveh, every aspect. But one of the highlights was that his purpose in going to the holies of holies was to find atonement for himself, for his family, and for the entire congregation. Interesting. The sense of community responsibility is fortunately highly developed among our people. Whether our public concerns are about this or other infinite problems or domestic philanthropies of hospitals, or religious institutions like synagogues and schools, the survival instinct, the desire to perpetuate and have with ideals, is really a very strong motivating force behind many of these things. The urgency of such activities are beyond question. So we may ask ourselves some personal questions, though. Can these activities be the totality of our life, of our Jewish life? Do our community efforts fulfill our obligations completely? Can we expect people far, far away to put that into action? So we may safely forget to look at the ways of our own households. People get involved with tikkun olam, with social issues. But what about our own home? What does our own home look like? All the activities, the projects, the chairmanship, the committees, the offices, minutes of meetings, motions and table motions, national and regional and local honors, districts, chapters, you know what I'm talking about, all these things. All these are no substitute for being a good parent, a good father, a good mother. A person can be very involved in all kinds of wonderful programs out there, What do we learn from the high priest? When he went in there, he asked for forgiveness for himself, for his family, and then the community. See, nor do these activities absolve us in any way of personally keeping what is right in our home. A person can't hide behind the fact that he's involved in the community, and he's this and he's that. But meanwhile, in his home is garnished. He's two-faced. We have responsibilities to ourselves, to our families, to our people, and all these obligations, really, we may enjoy peacefully, fruitfully, and in an atmosphere of coexistence. This is what we see from the high priest, who looked, note the order, to himself. He looks for forgiveness to himself, number one, his family, number two, and then the entire congregation. Just fascinating how careful we must be to have our priorities in the right order. In fact, someone really cannot be of a positive influence on the community if he's not of positive influence on himself. If there's some sort of a dichotomy between how he conducts himself in public and how his priorities are in private, he's missed it. So the high priest who goes into the holies of holies on Yom Kippur He wasn't just that individual. It's a lesson to all of us, that each of us go into our holies of holies. Each of us enter our essence. And each of us, believe it or not, are an influence in everybody. To ourselves, to our immediate family, and to the community at large. Every community is looking at everybody. Every one of us is making a difference. But the difference we can make and the positive impact we can have on the people around us only comes if the person themselves is at peace with themselves. If they're not at peace within themselves, their priorities, their outlooks, their conduct, their morality, and everything else, then they really cannot be a complete picture, a positive, impacting picture on the world around us. That's what we learn from this high priest. Another aspect of this individual, as I mentioned, he had to be married. And he had to be someone who had children. This is, of course, with great sensitivity to those who are single and who perhaps for physical reasons are unable to have children. But why should he be that way? The answer is he has to represent every so to speak, every category, every grouping, whether it's the marriage group, whether it's the individual group, whether it's, single, children, no children. He has to represent the entire, facet and the dimensions of the entire personality. Well, I think the same thing all of us can keep in mind, how important our perspectives are on everything around us. That everything we do can make a difference. A lady wrote to the Rabbi. She was single. She went to Crown Heights. She sees everybody's married, emphasis on having children. And she feels that she can't get married and she doesn't have children, obviously. And she feels like, what's her role in Jewish life? The Rabbi gave a beautiful answer. Please remember that every good deed that we do is considered like our children, because good deeds have an impact on the world. And even more so when we teach others, it's considered like our own children. That's how important our conduct and impacting we have on the world. Obviously, it's a great blessing to be married and to bless have children and to make sure our children and grandchildren are continuing the right ways. But even if someone is not that way, they still have that special role. And the Rebbe pointed out a very fascinating detail. The name Chava, Eve as we say, is when she was having children. But she had another name when she first was separated from Adam. It was called Ish and Isha. So there's a role for both male and female as individuals. Then, of course, in through marriage, there's children in that aspect. But if a person is not able to be the Chava, to be the mother of children, nevertheless they're Isha. They represent this unique dimension that they bring, just as men and now women and all of us together equally play an important role in this world of making this a home for the Almighty God. This is your host, Rabbi Perl. Thank you so much. Wishing you a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us. Good news and good health.